Mic check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 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 Mic check. Mic check. Good morning, everybody. Hi, Abigail. Hi, Kim. Hi, Molly. Hi, Anjie. Hi, Laura Ann. I don't know that you can hear me.
Everybody, can you hear me? We'll get started in just a few minutes. We're just dealing with some technology issues. We'll patch in one of our speakers here in a minute.
The 9:30 class avoiding eviction, successive resident retention and relationships will begin in a moment. Please make your way to Education Pavilion B.
right, good morning, everybody. Thank you again for your patience. Looks like we're having some issues getting one of our speakers with us, so I have her talking points. I'm going to kind of go over them and wing it a little bit. The bulk of the information is going to come from our other speakers here. So my name is Molly Kirkland. I am the Director of Public Affairs for the association. Can everybody hear me? Okay.
No, not in the back.
Gotcha. So welcome to Avoiding Evictions, Success in Resident Retention and Relationships. This seminar is presented today by Laura Ann Fernea, Executive Director of the City Heights Community Development Corporation. Ms. Fernea has over 30 years of experience working at public and nonprofit agencies and institutions including community development, education, international development, and public health projects. Laura Ann is committed to the organization's mission to enhance the quality of life for and with the community of City Heights through affordable housing and community and economic development. Ms. Fernea is joined today by Anjie Frias, who is currently serving as a policy and research advisor for the San Diego Eviction Prevention Collaborative. Ms. Frias is an attorney licensed in Georgia and California. Her work representing tenants has provided her with diverse experience negotiating landlord-tenant issues. In many cases, Anjie found that parties' initial failure to communicate often caused the problem, and she became committed to advancing landlord and tenant communication and education. She earned her BA in economics from Creighton University and a JD from Emory University School of Law. Supposed to join us today by Zoom was Lucinda Lilley, our current SCRHA president. However, she can't be with us, so I will go over her points. But if you don't know Lucinda, she's with FBS Property Management. She manages assets ranging in size from 1 to 100 units, and she serves also at the national level with advocacy and education and on our own committees in that regard. So with all that said, on behalf of the association, thank you so much for being here, and on behalf of the Education Committee, and we want to thank our speakers. I'm going to give you a quick little history. I actually have known these ladies now for a while, and we've been having conversations about evictions in a broader kind of scheme. And what we've found out, and I think certainly we've found out in the last year and a half or so, is that communication is everything. We know when the pandemic started, a lot of housing providers reached out proactively to find out what the needs were going to be for their residents, and that communication became very important early on. And we're seeing now that it's possibly a breakdown in communication that is getting folks to a point where you maybe don't want to be. And so we want to talk today about effective resolution of issues that might require just more education, a different perspective, and again, more communication. I think most of us can agree that the eviction system, the eviction process is broken. It's not where you want to end up. It's usually your last resort. There are opportunities, I think, before you get to that scenario to open the lines of communication. There could be misunderstandings. So I think these ladies will share some resources that'll maybe open your eyes to opportunities before you get to this stage of going to court. And we know that generally you don't want to go to court. It's time, it's money, and certainly the tenants don't want to go to court either. And so what we've been focusing is on ways to move forward. And I know Laura Ann will talk about this, but we've been involved in some conversations through the White House about eviction prevention. And Laura Ann and I and Anjie actually started having conversations long before that. I think even, before the pandemic started, on how we can work together as stakeholders. We're all members of the community, and there is no us versus them. We're all operating, as Alan always says, under the same laws. They just may apply a little bit differently, but let's all know them, learn them, and know what our rights and responsibilities are. And so we really want to talk about reaching out, working with other parties to figure out solutions to issues. And that's why we have invited these ladies here today. They're also with a group called the Eviction Prevention Collaborative. And this isn't to say, they want to stop every eviction in the world. No, sometimes, and I think you'll agree, it is a necessary process. But there's, again, lots of opportunity before you get to that stage to maybe prevent that displacement or maybe create a scenario for an easier move out or what have you. And so that's kind of the issues I think that we want to focus on. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Laura Ann.
Good morning. Anybody? Okay. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? No. Okay. How about if I hold it? Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. I wanted to thank Lucinda and Molly for organizing this. Lucinda would be here if she could. It was a last-minute problem, and I think it's indicative of our times. The pandemic has affected us all. in so many ways, and it's been a crisis that we're still in the midst of and we're still trying to deal with. I think also it's important to talk about the ones that have been most affected, which are those who are those frontline workers. And not only did they lose their jobs, but many of them lost their lives. And I just want to talk about that because it's a context that we don't want to forget. We want to try to keep us all alive and healthy as much as we can. And that's just a part of where we are right now. I think the fact that they couldn't pay their rent obviously is very important to this conversation. And it's something that they certainly would have wanted to do. I'm the director of the City Heights CDC. The City Heights CDC is a nonprofit that we've been in City Heights over 40 years. We have over 400 units of affordable housing. So I'm also a property owner, not owner, manager, partner. And it's really important to us to keep our residents in their properties just like it is for you, I'm sure, as well. Because of that, I learned about the situation for renters in other properties because we would get, this is way pre-pandemic. For years, we've had a lot of people coming into our office looking for housing, and also when they had problems with their landlords and they didn't know what to do. That's what made me realize that there were just not enough resources or information, that they didn't know where to turn, that they didn't even know where to send them, that they couldn't figure out what to do or where they should go. And that's what really prompted, first of all, is to do an emergency rental fund for renters who were having some kind of a medical emergency or their car broke down and they just literally didn't have their monthly income that year. We started that program in 2019. It was very helpful for a lot of families who were just on the edge and they were able to stay in their homes, and we always paid the landlord directly. So that also prompted, during the pandemic, working with quite a few agencies and resources, the need for a coordinated system. When I say coordinated system, I mean, how do we help tenants and landlords understand where the resources are? How do we get them informed? How do we provide that information that so many of them need? What is the way to do that? And we have to work together, right? And that's also part of what prompted me to work with Molly for so long. I think it's been at least over a year. And we've just had a lot of conversations about how to do that. And they were also part of the White House Summit for Eviction Prevention that happened in June. So I think that the other big part of the pandemic in terms of this conversation is how much the laws have changed for the rental housing market, right? It's constantly changing. There are so many new laws. It's very hard for anybody to keep up. Landlord, tenant, property owner, property manager, even anybody who's not even renting, it's very, very difficult to keep up with those. So I think what happened is it gave it even more of an impetus for us to be able to say, how can we help people get real good information? How can we provide them with the resources that they can get to also pay their rent when they don't have jobs? And that's what a large part of what we do at the Collaborative is we have a website that has links to the government funding for rental help. So we have a link to the Chula Vista one, to the county one, and to the City of San Diego one, as well as private funds. And we help people every day. We have tenants calling because we have private funding, and we have a lot of tenants, as I'm sure you can imagine, who are very afraid to go to government agencies to get that money. And so we help them without doing that. So it's very important to us, and it's something that we're constantly working on. But I think the point of this conference in general is about communication, because we know that preventing evictions is a two-way street. It has to be both sides. Effective communication is essential because if the notices aren't explained, if the tenant gets a notice and doesn't respond, and the landlord doesn't understand, and neither does the tenant, then obviously that's a problem. So effective communication is a crucial tool, and there's many reasons. I think helping the tenant understand their lease is important. Helping the tenant understand their responsibilities and their rights is important. Ensuring their rent is paid on time, and if it's not, understanding why. And establishing an open door approach so that when the tenant does have an issue that prevents them from paying their rent or from responding, that is able to go and talk to the landlord because they know that the landlord is already willing to listen and has either translation services or a good method for communication already, which could be phone call, or it could be texting, or it could be email. There's lots of options, right? But it's really important to set that up so that the tenant is able to have that kind of responsive communication when needed. I think that the last thing is just that this is an ongoing and important conversation. It's not going to stop. We're really thankful to Lucinda and Molly that we can keep talking and conversing and figuring these problems out. And we do feel that it's really important to constantly focus on what are our common goals and how we can work together on those. So thank you for your time, and I'm going to hand it over to Anjie. She's got a lot more to say about some of the specific resources and some of her experiences. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me? Good, okay. Thank you so much for being here today. It's my pleasure to be here to talk with you about my experiences interacting with property owners, managers, and renters as an attorney. Nothing I say today is intended to be legal advice. I'm merely here to give some examples of what I've seen and what can maybe help with respect to the three principles that we're trying to focus on: education, communication, and perspective. I would like to ask your forgiveness in the beginning for some of the terms that I use. Lucinda, we've had discussions with Lucinda and with Molly, and Lucinda has an intention to shift from speaking about landlords and tenants to speaking about property owners, managers, and renters. And for me, I took my first bar exam in 1996. I've studied statutes and case law for years and years and years, and they all use landlord and tenant. So for me, it's something that just slips out because I'm talking about laws. I'm not putting a connotation on that, but I brought notes and I wrote out my things. I'm going to do my best to respect the shift that Lucinda would like. I represented tenants in Georgia in 2019. I took the California bar exam in February 2020, walking out of that exam 2 weeks before the United States shut down for the pandemic. And while waiting for the bar results, I started studying the housing laws here and how they differed from Georgia. And I thought that the Tenant Protection Act of 2019, with its just cause and its rent cap provisions, would be my biggest learning curve, but I was really wrong. All of these laws regarding rental assistance and moratoria are dizzying. And as Laura Ann said, it's changing rapidly and it's complex. But setting aside those laws about rental assistance and moratoria, most of the other laws have not changed. Thank you. They're still the same. And I'm still encountering them when I talk to renters and property owners and managers, because I think there's still a lack of knowledge of rights and responsibilities that renters and property owners have. I've spoken with renters who are withholding their rent because a repair wasn't fixed the day they called about it. And I've spoken to renters who have paid their rent in full, despite the fact that repairs to the property that they didn't cause are taking 3+ months to get done. And they're living in what is essentially a toxic living environment because of those repairs. I've spoken with property owners who are distraught, and rightfully so, over the damage being caused to their property by their renters, and they couldn't evict them this past summer. But I've also spoken to renters who are being denied their security deposit, even though there's just normal wear and tear, and they have proof of that. And I've spoken with property owners who have been denied proper access to their units. But I've also spoken with renters who have walked out of the bathroom to find their property owner standing there as they're in a towel, standing there unannounced, not having given proper notice. So it's happening on both sides. And what needs to happen, and where we need to be, is the point at which both parties understand their rights and responsibilities. These laws exist because these topics have historically been sources of conflict. Knowing these laws provides an opportunity to resolve a basic dispute using the law and without, hopefully, intense emotions. You'll still feel them, but when you present the law is the law. Understanding not just the mechanics of lease execution, but also property management empowers the property owner to make informed and appropriate decisions regarding the property. And basic information regarding these rights and responsibilities is out there. It just needs to be accessed. Luckily, property owners and managers have the Southern California Rental Housing Association and similar trade associations. And I am not a Southern California Rental Housing Association spokesperson, but I've gone on their website and I've seen that they have significant resources for property owners and managers. I've seen classes about fair housing laws and notices, and they do weekly updates. So they've got a lot of information on there. I also know there's a website for the American Apartment Association, and they've got laws and a map and laws for all the states, and you can go to your state and you can find the basics of what you need to know, of what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. There's obviously the California Guide to Tenants and Landlords' Rights and Responsibilities. It was updated in September of 2020. And you probably are very familiar with it, but if you're not, it's an excellent tool to use. It covers routine leasing situations that can happen by topic. So it can be an excellent reference for questions that you might have. And what I like about all these resources is they're readily accessible. So if you have a renter who's pushing back at what you're saying in terms of your rights and responsibilities, you can direct them to these resources so that it's not a source of conflict for you, that you're saying this and you're right and they're wrong. You can just say, look at these resources, this is the law. And that's especially true because unfortunately for renters don't have trade associations that they join when they become renters. We're building the Eviction Prevention Collaborative to be one resource for them, but that's just one resource. And again, we're building it. It's a work in progress. So again, when both of the parties have access to their rights and responsibilities, it empowers them to resolve the disputes in an intelligent and hopefully a less emotional way. We also wanted to talk about communication today, especially effective communication. And I know Lucinda is disappointed to not be here because she had a lot of really useful information about communication. And I think one of her primary messages, Molly did a great job of summarizing everything. But I remember when I was talking with Lucinda, one of her primary keys was effective communication and connecting, making sure you're connecting with the renter so that you have an understanding there, because it's so often that we communicate but we're not really heard. I had a client that I was advising in California regarding her plants, and she'd moved into a unit, and her property owner, she asked if she could bring her plants, and her property owner said, yeah, you can bring your plants, but we need to elevate them. We need to put them on cinder block with planks. And she's like, okay, that sounds good. And according to her, the owner manager said, I'll get you the supplies. So she thought, well, this is great. And then shortly after that, she got her invoice for the materials to build the planks and the cinder blocks to put her plants on. And she said, wait a minute, I didn't say I would pay for these. And of course, the property owner said, but of course you were. These are your plants. So obviously there was a clear miscommunication there. And my golden standard is always get it in writing. This is important, obviously, for documentation purposes, but it's also important because it provides another means of evaluation by both parties, right? Some people acknowledge what you're saying, but you know they didn't really hear what you just said, like my husband, for instance. And some people only hear what they want to hear, and you may know some of these people too, right? I actually was just reading this morning that 65% of the population are visual learners. So they have to see it to really process it. And had the property owner in my plant story written the terms down, even if the acknowledgement by the renter was verbal, I think the situation would have been better than it was. And that's because first, it would have stated who was responsible for the costs, most likely. And so there would have been less confusion. Secondly, it would have provided a second means of communication that would have increased the likelihood that there was a mutual understanding between the parties, right? So those visual learners, if that's what she would have laid eyes on it and remembered it, hopefully. So plants are obviously one very specific example of how communication can break down, but I've seen similar things happen with sublessors, with pets, with use of appliances and other amenities. So no matter how small or trivial the issue seems, utilizing tools for effective communication can make sure that you're connecting with that renter and there's less confusion and less misunderstanding. The third thing that we wanted to focus on was perspective. Perspective is lacking, I believe, in many, many ways in this world right now. but we can't solve the world's problems, but we can consider the importance of perspective in leasing and renter, property owner, manager, renter relationships, right? Each time a repair request comes in, I am certain that one's mind goes to the cost of that, especially right now when costs are so inflated to do anything to your property. I know property owners who have talked to me about their renters and how their renters are constantly breaking things and they're constantly having to fix it. And then renters are always complaining that the property owners are just, making, tons of money off of them and living the high life. And we all know that there's mortgages and taxes and upkeep costs that are dependent upon that rent. So perspective can really make a difference. When I worked in Georgia, I had a client who was renting a 2-story townhome. And she had the middle unit. And one day, her tenants to her left were evicted. And they left rapidly. So they left a smorgasbord of food. And unfortunately, the management company was a little slow in turning over the unit. So once these rats had devoured all the food in this unit, they went looking for new sources. They started eating through the walls, and they found my client's home. And my client is a single mom with 2 young kids. She always kept her home clean. She always paid her rent in full. And she woke up one morning to food everywhere on her downstairs level. And so she set a trap, and she caught a rat. And she thought, okay, that happens. And then she realized that they were coming through her pantry the next day because she found more food everywhere. And so she called management, and in the meantime, she caught 9 more rats. She lost use of her kitchen due to the rat feces and urine that was constantly in there. She couldn't keep food in her house, in her pantry, unless it was in metal containers. And she had to take her young son to the hospital because he had seizures due to the rat droppings. And management finally responded, and they said, here, you can move to this unit down the hill. And as a single working mom of 2 small children, being told that you can move to the unit down the hill is not as easy as swapping your keys out. And I think that response lacked perspective of this woman's situation. I had another client here in California during the pandemic, and she was given a 60-day notice to vacate. And while that was entirely within the property owner's rights and it was legal, this particular renter was in real jeopardy of becoming homeless. Her husband was bedridden and had to be taken to a medical facility for treatment multiple times per week. They were both elderly, and they had no grown kids who could help them or take them in. Now, those of you who have moved houses before know it's a lot of work to move. And if you don't have the luxury of a moving company anyway, and for someone with a disability or caring for a disability, you may or may not know it's even harder. And it's not a question of, I really can't find a 4-bedroom, I'll settle for a 3-bedroom kind of replacement issue. It's where can I find a 1-story place so my spouse who's bedridden or wheelchair bound can get from point A to point B. And of note, these tenants had paid their rent in full each month. So I had to just recommend that she ask for a reasonable accommodation, start packing what she could, and try to find a replacement unit. But I think knowing your renter and thinking about the challenges they may have, whether you're getting a reasonable accommodation request or maybe with those open lines of communication, hearing that maybe they had a health crisis and that's why the rent payment was delayed a couple of days, can really be a moment to pause and consider why that request is being made and who that person is on the other side of the transaction, because it gives us perspective. And I think perspective makes us better people. It's kind of that human component to our interactions, and Lucinda always talks about being a housing provider, and I think that's part of perspective. Is being a housing provider requires that type of perspective. I think if the management company with the rat dilemma had paused for a moment with perspective of what this woman was going through and how it had not been her fault at all, I would like to think that I would not have met her, because they would have offered her the resources she needed, really. And my client, who needed a little more time to find appropriate housing in a pandemic rental market, I'd like to think that perspective might have influenced the property owner to maybe give her a little bit more time. Maybe give her a 90-day notice instead of a 60-day notice, just a little extra time. Or maybe had a conversation up front. Hey, listen, we really need to sell this property, or we really need into this property. You know, this we're intending to do it, so please start looking for a new place, kind of thing. Having those lines of communication open and having that perspective, I think can make a difference in resolving issues with renters and property owners. And of course, none of this is meant to belittle those times when evictions are necessary, when there's property damage or illegal activities on the property. Those are obviously completely separate problems that really these principles are not going to work on or work towards solving. But again, our hope is that by pausing to consider, do you have the education? Do you know your rights and responsibilities? Have you shared those with the renter? Have you taken a moment and paused about the perspective of who this renter is? And have you communicated? Have you had effective communication with the renter? Hopefully doing that before moving forward with an eviction can help all the parties resolve their conflicts. And that's all I've got. I think we're going to question and answer now.
Yeah, we want to, am I on? We're going to go ahead and open it up for some Q&A. I'll just say quickly, I think you're hearing a common theme. Communication is everything. And really, like to Angie's point, you know, if you're making a deal with your, you know, tenant on pots and plants or something like that, it is a recommendation to make sure you put that in writing. I know there's a lot of verbal conversations, and quite often those can come back and bite you. So even if you just have a verbal conversation and you hang up the phone or you walk away from the building, go jot down the gist of that, you know, and maybe even send a follow-up email to your tenant. You know, gone are the days of the handshakes and the verbal agreements. You really need everything in writing, and not just for your protection and God forbid if you end up in court, but just for those kinds of miscommunications. And I think, you know, raise your hand if you've tried to communicate with your resident, you know, in the last year and a half and you've never heard back from them. That's a problem. But is it they've never felt comfortable communicating? Is it they just don't want to talk to you because maybe they're really not supposed to qualify for the eviction moratorium? Who knows? But I think it highlights the importance of the communication, and I think it highlights and I think it also, thank you, Abby. I think it also highlights the importance of why we're working together. You know, it can't be us versus them anymore. We really all need to get on the same page. We need to all understand the rights and responsibilities. And if it, you know, it means you have to take a little extra time to go over what I know is a very lengthy lease these days, then maybe you do that so there isn't confusion down the road. And certainly, you know, to these ladies' points, there are resources, and there could be some more resources out there for residents to understand those things up front. So with that said, does anybody have any questions? I know Anjie mentioned mediation. We have some information out in the back there about the mediation services through the National Conflict Resolution Center that are available, and that's funded by the county. So that's a free service to you. You can do mediation for landlord-tenant disputes. You can do it for other things. They also have something that if for some reason neither party wants to do mediation together because it's very contentious, they'll do what's called, I think, conciliation, where they'll kind of be the intermediary and be the middleman for that dispute. So I think it's an opportunity that more property owners and residents should take advantage of to kind of clear up some confusion. Where is it? Oh, there it is. Sorry, I can't see.
This is about avoiding eviction, and sometimes eviction is necessary. I've heard that the courts are overwhelmed, and maybe actually getting eviction numbers year after night. Is that true? Is that false? What do the court situations look like?
It's not a year.
You know, I don't have any personal knowledge of it. I do volunteer in the Vista Courthouse, but things have been on hold and difficult. So yes, those are the same things I'm hearing, and that at a minimum, it's going to take 3 to 4 months to evict a tenant. So obviously that sort of makes all that we're talking about today even more important. If you can work with your tenant, that definitely is a better option than if having to wait that long. If that's amenable. I mean, obviously some evictions are absolutely necessary, and unfortunately, I heard in the courthouse. I work in the unlawful detainer clinic, and so I hear the stories of the renters, unfortunately, some of them damaging the property and it needing to be an issue of they really need to get out of there before it gets worse. And it's part of the pandemic. I don't know what else I could say. It's just unfortunately the way it is right now. It's another ripple effect of the pandemic.
And I think we will know more here probably come, October, once the statewide protections lift. Obviously residents will, if they complied with state law, they'll have protections, including if they paid, 25% of the rent by September 30th. But, come October, we'll really see how many folks comply with that, how many people are actually getting that rental assistance that is so desperately needed out there, to really figure out what the court system is going to look like. And then there's going to be a modified process from October through the end of March under the moratorium. And so your 3-day notice will look just slightly different. It'll have some mandatory language from the state. But when you file an unlawful detainer, before they'll issue a summons, you're going to have to attest to certain things regarding rental assistance before they will issue that summons to that tenant. So it's going to be kind of a learning curve for us, and we're going to be leaning on our partners, our attorney members, to find out how that works, and then we'll know better then kind of what the eviction process is going to look like and what the delays are going to be like. I don't think, there's talk about an eviction tsunami and that kind of thing. I don't think we're going to see that because the statewide protections were pretty solid, but it all remains to be seen.
I just wanted to add that, just so make sure everybody knows that through end of March, there's still the rental assistance available up to 100% of back rent and projected debt. So that's important for you guys to know. They still can get that money.
Regarding that assistance, how long before the tenant and the landlord applies for the assistance do you actually get paid?
It really depends, yeah. And I would say, well, from what I've seen, the county or the city has been the quickest. I think the county. Yeah.
Yeah, if you get rental assistance, if you apply for rental assistance and both parties work together, because obviously there are delays that one party or the other might cause. If both parties work together, I believe I heard that some of the checks were coming out within a couple weeks.
Yeah,
That's what one of the attorneys said recently.
I'll tell you that I've been talking to some members this week about it, and they're actually getting payments for future months. It is happening. It's happening very fast here. And I know that sounds awkward to say because a lot of people don't feel like it, but I was just in Chicago 2 weeks ago, and I can tell you Texas is at 4% of distribution. We're in our 70% here in San Diego and Riverside County. So we've done a great job, Molly, especially with Molly Chase at the Housing Commission, Housing Authority, that the work that they've organized in the streamlined process is far beyond anywhere else in the country. Anywhere in the state and anywhere in the country. We're doing a phenomenal job here for you. It is cumbersome. We have some suggestions that we're going to be working with the jurisdictions on to try and ease that process even more. So watch for that here in the next couple of weeks as we start to share the information with them. We actually did a study with Point Loma Nazarene University that was conducted over the last 4 or 5 months, and that came back with some really good information that we're going to be able to share with them to make that process even better for everybody. And because, again, very much the reason we wanted to do this presentation is that it's a symbiotic relationship with our residents. They need housing, we're housing providers. That makes sense. Our job is to work with them to get the process that the government's providing to all of us to work for both parties, for your customers and for you. And that's our goal. That's what we wanted to try and present to you today. There are other options. There's things that you can do, even if you're in the process of trying to evict a tenant, there's other things that you can do through mediation that might take you out of that cycle. Get it done faster, compromises to be made, communications to be had. And that's the biggest thing that we want to make sure that the community knows and understands, that it's beneficial for both parties.
And I think just to add to that, all the government officials we've talked to about the rental emergency program, they're very, very interested in getting it out to as many people as possible. And I would, if you're having a hard time getting responses, I would work through your trade association because they have those direct contacts, just like we do, and it really makes a difference.
I apologize. These are the faux pas of having a trade show after a pandemic. We ordered posters for the Lucinda's information. We got these. So you can come by with your cell phone and take a picture of it. It's just one of those things that happen.
You can also visit the National Conflict Resolution Center's website, and just Google it for San Diego, and all those resources and how to get in touch with them will pop up. But yeah, to Alan's point, the scenario for when you get those rental checks, it just entirely depends on the cooperation, if everybody's responding and giving the necessary paperwork. We know in some scenarios there are housing providers that have not cooperated, and now their residents will get 100% of the rent directly, and then they're supposed to turn around and pay you. There are also the tenants who aren't cooperating, and the unfortunate thing with the rental assistance, the way it's set up from the federal government, is there has to be tenant cooperation because there are income requirements and a few other things that have to be complied with. If you don't know, the county just launched a program that it's available to property owners of 5 or fewer units, and there's some other requirements. It's called the Rental Assistance for Small Landlords, Razzle dazzle. And so if you're in a scenario where your tenant doesn't qualify for rental assistance or they haven't cooperated, and you can demonstrate that and a few other of the requirements under the program, you can get some rental assistance directly from the county to kind of make you a little bit whole. Any other questions? We'll hang out up here for a little while if you want to come talk to us and find out, what other resources are available. Thank you so much for being here and for your patience with our technology issues. Have a good one.